present while we speak, and I'm going to tell you why in a second. So it's a pleasure to be with you, brothers and sisters, friends. I see some comrades. I do. It's important for me to say a little bit why I'm here. I don't know, how many of you have been on a demonstration recently to try and stop the genocide that's happening in Palestine? So pretty much each and every one of you. And I think I'm basically here because, like you, I went to those demonstrations. And I had a conversation today with a transplant surgeon at my work. And he said, oh, I've got to introduce you to someone, he's Palestinian. And I keep on telling him, I know this guy, he's a crazy guy, he's not a Palestinian, but he really stands up for you guys. It's a phenomenon you have to kind of explain away. And to me, this goes to the heart of that question. Why is it that despite seeing day after day the crimes, the violence, the genocide, quite clearly a genocide unfolding, why is it that a large part of the British people, European people, don't consider this such an outrage that they also come onto the streets? Now, our demonstrations have been very large, right? 500,000 people, 1 million people, I think, on the 11th of November. That's a massive movement. And it's the power of that movement that our government is afraid of. And it's afraid of, not because it doesn't know what's happening in Palestine, it's afraid of precisely because it knows what's happening in Palestine. Not only do we as British, and you're all working and living in Britain, you're British working people, not only do we have a special responsibility because, as our last speaker, Yaya, where are you? Yaya, I want to give you this. Love it. As you're still learning. Not only did the British have a special hand in creating Palestine, as it currently exists, the Jewish Mandate for Palestine, creating Israel, sustaining it and perpetrating it. They did it for a particular reason. And they did it for a reason which happened long before. They did it for the same reason they fought World War I. Who knows why we fought World War I? By your GCSE textbook. Any hands? Forgive my teaching method, I'm so sorry.
So we were in the line the Hungarian Serbs, was killed.
Who was killed? Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So this is the reason we're taught, right? It was a terrible thing. Archduke Franz Ferdinand got killed, and we all had to kill 40 million workers all around the world because it's just unquestionable that you can't go around killing Archduke Franz Ferdinand. 40 million people got to die. But that's nonsense, right? That's nonsense. Everyone could see that that World War was coming. And the reason it came was because something happened in 1884. Does anyone know what happened in 1884? In Berlin.
Crimean War? Sorry,
So what happened was the Berlin Congress happened. But in 1884, the big European imperial powers had a conference. And basically they'd already divided up the whole world between them, with possibly the exception of Ethiopia and China. And at this point, they had Africa in front of them, and they literally drew lines on the map who was going to have which part of Africa. And if you see the map of Africa, you'll see you have a lot of multinational states, so essentially creation of this artificial Congress. Big lines, huge area of the Congo, became Zaire, became the Congo again, given to King Leopold as his personal fighting. Europe just divided up Africa. At that point, there was nothing left to conquer. And so when the rising powers became strong enough and wanted to steal some colonies to make extra money, what did they have to do? They had to fight each other. So it was a plan, and these plans are not new. You all have heard of the Sykes-Picot Agreement? Yeah? So the Sykes-Picot Agreement was the agreement between the foreign ministers of France and Britain as to how, when they defeated the Ottoman Empire, they were going to divide its colonies up between them. And they went on, and they did that, right? The only reason we really found out about that was the Russian Revolution. The Tsar's forces were involved, but the Bolsheviks published those treaties, so we saw what happened. How do you then go on to take those enormous colonies and rule them? And they ruled them in a certain way. They engendered privileged communities, and Zionism was their answer to how the British ruled their part. The British were past masters at dividing and ruling colonies. They've done it in India for 200 years. How many of you have some kind of origin in South Asia? Fair number of them, right? So your entire history, your family history has been conditioned by the British Empire. It's not a separate struggle. It's the same struggle. The legacy of those times continue to affect us today. That's where Zionism comes from. Zionism was an idea. You get the mandate of Palestine. It just falls into your hand. What does a mandate mean? A new colony we stole from Turkey. And when we had it, we needed a way to divide it and rule. And literally, this is not my words, this is the words of Ronald Stores. Ronald Stores was the first British governor, British put there, who described himself as the first military governor of Palestine since Pontius Pilate. And he said, our intention is to create there, in Palestine, a loyal Jewish Ulster in a sea of potentially hostile Arabism. Not my words, don't send me to jail. They're the words of the British government. So they wanted to create a privileged population. It wasn't an accident. At that time, it was before oil was fully discovered and had the significance it has today. But the whole area was still an important trading post on the way to India, which is the most crucial part of their empire. So it had an enormous significance, and as oil was discovered, it had an even greater significance. And it maintains that significance today. There's a lot of talk about greening the world, getting rid of fossil fuels. There's a lot of talk about, standing up for human rights, truth, and democracy. But I was a student activist, and I found problems, as Yahya did, being a student activist, around the issue of the Gulf War. I know at least some of you were here in the march in 2003. Anyone remember the march in 2003? Anyone out on the streets? So there were probably 1 to 2 million of us out on the streets campaigning against that. What was that war about? It was about oil. No? It was about wealth. It wasn't about human rights. It wasn't about the rights of the March Arabs. It wasn't about the rights of the Kurds. It was about oil, it was about wealth, it was about money. It was about the money and the super profits made by the monopoly oil corporations and armaments manufacturers. And if we trace that forward and see now, what have we got now? We've got a third of Syria occupied by the USA. And in case we don't think we know what that's about, because it's portrayed as complex, you can't get to the bottom of these issues, Donald Trump made it pretty clear what's that about. Did any of you see what Donald Trump said about it? He was told, it's really stupid policy in Syria. What are you doing in Syria? You're stupid. And he said, I don't think I'm stupid. We've got the oil. We've got the oil. We've got the oil. They came for the oil. Israel remains an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Middle East. It remains a key strategic ally. Have any of you seen that video of Joe Biden saying, I'm a Zionist? If Israel didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. Newsflash for Joe Biden, it didn't exist, it was invented by the British imperialists. It was taken over after the Suez Crisis by the US imperialists. That's where it remains. It's not an accident that all our politicians indemnify all of the crimes of Israel, that our press indemnifies the crime. But I turn on the TV and I'm bombarded with, even though he's off the air, Piers Corbyn telling everyone they have to condemn Hamas. Do you condemn Hamas? You get everyone on there who's remotely, pro-Palestinian, who's remotely anti-genocide, and you get them there and you berate them. Do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn Hamas? They're a terrorist organisation. So either they back down and say, oh, of course I condemn Hamas, and then they do a thing, don't they? They conflate Hamas with the entire Palestinian people. They pretend history never existed before the 7th of October. Before the 7th of October, everything was very peaceful, and then this terrible operation happened, and now anything's justified because it's the largest genocide of Jews ever since the Holocaust. There's only been one Holocaust. There's never been any other historical act of terrorism. And you probably guys have probably seen Norman Finkelstein. I first learned about Norman Finkelstein a long time ago when I read his book, The Holocaust Industry. And anyone who hasn't got it, go and get that book, The Holocaust Industry. Because they said very early on, the Zionists, and this is why I was arrested, for this knowledge. It's really knowledge that they feared. It's truth that our government feared. It's the idea that people who are on the streets, 1 million people on the streets, is not easy to control. I saw the number of police they put on the streets on those days. It's amazing. Have a look down the side streets. Every side street is lined with TSG, Territorial Support Group Police. It's lined with City Police. It's lined with police from Manchester, from all over the country. Thousands of police. Riot police, but they can't attack and criminalise 1 million of them. And yet that's what they want to do, right? Suella Braverman has been saying from the beginning, these are hate marches. You're hateful. So, hang on, let me get this straight. The logic of it is, you campaign against genocide, you're hateful. So what's the way of avoiding being hateful? Because no one wants to be hateful or racist or anti-Semitic. We must support the genocide, right? So standing against the genocide, giving information, educating people about Zionism, these are unpardonable crimes. And it reminds me a bit of a quotation which is kind of perhaps widely known, but not well attributed and understood. And there's a Nazi propaganda minister. Do you know his name? Goebbels. And he was very famous for saying, if you tell a big enough lie, often enough, that people will believe it. But he also said, in that same paper, which is a paper, he said, the truth is the enemy of the lie, and by extension, the truth is the enemy of the state. And so this false narrative that we're all bombarded with all the time, is very important. It's very disabling, it's very confusing, and it goes right down to a historical level. If you don't really know what your enemy is and who you're fighting, you're never going to win. And I agree with you, absolutely. It's very important to understand Zionism. And I'm not going to get all left on it, because probably I should stop speaking, and I'll hardly even do that. But it's very important to understand Zionism. It's an ideology that was not Jewish. It was a Christian fundamentalist ideology of not just Arthur Balfour, but Lord Salisbury and various Victorian imperialists who said they wanted to Zionize Judaism and Judaize Zionism. They wanted to create a population they could implant in the Middle East to help them with their colonial aspirations to dominate the region and new colonies that they took from the Ottoman Empire. That was the origin of it. It was always an ultra-right supremacist ideology. And therefore, it's not a coincidence that it shared fundamentally racist views from its outset, non-assimilationist views. Our current Israeli ambassador, are you aware of her, Sophie Hotedli? If you just Google her, you'll see one of the controversial things she was on campus, and she invited a very hardcore right-wing bunch of Zionists talking about the evils of miscegenation. You know miscegenation? Mixing of races. They had an organization, and I'm paraphrasing, something like preventing of mixed marriages in the Holy Land, something like that. They're very against the idea of mixing of Jewish blood. Not there is such a thing as Jewish blood. Judaism is a religion, right? It's not a racial group. To the extent that you subscribe to the theory of race at all, Judaism isn't a racial group, it's a religion. But this is their ideas. So it's a far-right, ultra-nationalist, supremacist ideology. So to speak about it, it's anti-racist. And this book gives that history. It's so far right-wing that at the time when Hitler and the Nazis were rising, the Zionists said, actually, these people are good for us. They're good for us because we want to promote the ideas of separatism. We want to promote the ideas of nationalism. We want to promote the idea that Jews don't belong in Europe, they should leave Europe, come to Palestine. And therefore, there's a synthesis, there's a coincidence of our views. They're different ideologies. Quite clearly, the Nazis were supremacists and ultimately went on to try and wipe out Jews. But the Zionists thought this is an opportunity to actually further our own political aims. For that reason, they made a transfer agreement, the Havar. The Havar was a transfer agreement that allowed transfer of capital and people from Germany, from Europe, to Palestine. And so these are historical facts which are buried, and therefore Israel has the ability to indemnify itself against its crimes. And constantly says, as we saw today, you know. So, do we get a round of applause for South Africa? To take Israel's genocide to the ICJ for a ruling of genocide, to ask for provisional measures, essentially for a ceasefire. And what they got today was a ruling that essentially is likely to be genocide. The course was ongoing. They've got provisional measures awarded short of a ceasefire. And what does the foreign minister of Gaza say? The very same foreign minister who, on September the 8th, came on our TV screens and said, what we're dealing with in Gaza is human animals, and we'll treat them as such. We'll cut off their food, we'll cut off their water, we'll cut off their electricity, we'll cut off their fuel, will cut off their medical supplies. This same chap, what was his response? He said, Israel will continue to defend itself. We're acting within human law. Anyway, this is an anti-Semitic ruling. You know? It's a very old tactic. You indemnify yourself against your crimes, and then in that way, you can carry on committing those crimes. What I think we have to do is carry on with our activism. I probably was here just to talk about my arrests, but I'm more interested in talking about something else. But what I would encourage you to do is get hold of this book. It's a very short, succinct book that gives some very powerful information, historical information on Zionism. Everyone, I'm plagued by this now. Everywhere I go, you can just say, I'm either the book, right? This is actually now 4 times I've been arrested, all for political activism. I can tell you that there's nothing to be afraid of. After they arrest you, they have to let you go. After they let you go, they have to apologize. After they apologize, they give you money. You know, so the bottom line is, ignore it. But what they're trying to do is to create a situation where you're under such pressure at work that you get sacked. And when the first time I was arrested in 2008, and that was again Operation Pass led outside the Israeli embassy, I was basically blacklisted, which is why now I work in Sheffield. I not me. I live here, I work in Sheffield. So I don't think they can do anything to suppress my career anymore. So don't be afraid, keep going. What they really fear is you, is your activism. It's the fact that we're from so many different walks of life, and yet we come together in the cause of a universal truth, humanity, and justice, and we're exposing their crimes just as they're trying to escalate a wider war in the Middle East. It's very important you stay on the streets. It's important you educate yourself to oppose their policy and see this. It's an anti-human policy, and we must stick together. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Yes, can we? Name of the book. Zionism, a racist, anti-Semitic, and reactionary tool of imperialism.
Did you all hear that?
I'm not good at this. Okay, where can they get it from?
Sorry, it's called Zionism. Zionism. It's called a racist, anti-Semitic, and reactionary tool of imperialism. Okay. I'm going to say it's almost sold out. We're going to have to reprint it. Like thousands of it sold as arrested. But you can get it online, and it's you go to The Communists. Don't be put off by the name. It's very important to get over these ideas. A lot of misinformation. But go The Communists, COMUNISTS, thecommunists.org. If you go there, you can order it online. You can get in touch with us, and we can continue our work.
We're a bit short of time, but if anyone has any questions for Dr. Yahya or Dr. Ranjeet, please put your hands up. We'll take about 3. Any questions? Yeah.